Hello, my well-esteemed guests. Bottles here, and welcome to a brand new series that Shay64 and I are planning on starting called Sonic What Ifs, where we tweak one part of the Sonic the Hedgehog lore and give our take on what the story for the games could be with this one little tweak. We thought we'd start out with a longer one to really kick things off, and that one would be, what if the gun raid never happened? The gun raid is the most important part of Shadow's backstory. It's what killed Maria, got the Ark shut down, put Professor Gerald in jail, and some would even argue, made Dr. Eggman the villain that he is today. Let's see how removing it from the timeline would affect things. We start back 50 or so years before the present timeline up on the Space Colony Ark. Professor Gerald was enlisted to become one of the brilliant scientists to be sent to the Space Colony Ark. Professor Gerald refused at first, but after learning that his granddaughter Maria had a rare disease called Neuroimmune Deficiency Syndrome, NIDS for short, he decided to agree. This is where he set off to create the ultimate life form, deemed Project Shadow. At the same time, Professor Gerald was working on a side project, Project Gizoid. Gunn was a little miffed that Gizoid ended up destroying a good chunk of the Ark, but saw the potential in using the tools that Professor Gerald was able to create. As a result of this, Gunn decided to enlist Professor Gerald as their main scientist to create things that would further benefit their organization and the protection of the people. Professor Gerald would agree on one condition: no weapons. The gun commander of the time, Adam Tower, would skeptically look at Gizoid.
Well, no intentional weapons, by the way.
This created a very close relationship between Professor Gerald and Adam, and they ended up creating a sort of friendship between one another. As Professor Gerald was working on Project Shadow, he was hitting a bunch of dead ends, which was when he had his collaboration with Black Doom of the Black Arms. Professor Gerald used the blood of Black Doom to finally complete his ultimate life form. The difference here is that Professor Gerald would be completely transparent with Gunn that he enlisted Black Doom's help to finish Project Shadow. Adam was furious with Professor Gerald. How could he collaborate with such a brutish alien force that none of them could possibly understand?
You underestimate me. Of course, I have a backup plan.
This is when Professor Gerald shows his blueprints for a new project, the Eclipse Cannon. Professor Gerald tells him that the Black Comet comes around every 50 years or so. We will use the Eclipse Cannon to destroy it. Problem solved.
I thought you said no weapons. Some rules are meant to be broken.
Professor Gerald goes back to the Ark and finishes the development of what we would come to know as Shadow the Hedgehog. Shadow the Hedgehog would become great friends with Professor Gerald's granddaughter Maria. Now, you'd probably be surprised to hear that nothing of note really happens for a while. The gun raid never happens because Gunn and Professor Gerald understand each other. They don't fear one another. So right off the bat, Shadow never gets captured and sealed away, Maria never gets shot, and Professor Gerald never gets executed. Around 20 years later, another kid gets brought to the Space Colony Ark to see the grandfather he looks up to so much do his work. This child's name is Ivo Robotnik. Ivo found it so cool that his grandfather was a super cool scientist in space, and he wanted to be just like him. Gerald felt no qualms about taking in his little grandson to teach him everything he knows about science. Think of him as his little assistant. This is where Ivo not only learns his amazing skills in robotics, but he also learns an implicit set of values from his dear old grandfather. Professor Gerald teaches his grandson that what they should strive for, above all else, is world peace. Ivo, through growing up on the Ark, also becomes very close with Maria and Shadow, and the son of the gun commander, Abraham Tower. This situation wasn't all sunshine and rainbows, however. Gerald noticed that Though Ivo was brilliant, one of the smartest people he has ever had the pleasure of knowing, and that's saying something since he's so young, but he also has a very logical way of thinking. Ivo is definitely a more ends justify the means type of person. Unfortunately for Gerald, Ivo also seems to have an inclination towards destruction for the common good. Ethics is not in Ivo's language, if it means scientific progress. Gerald does his best to calm these urges that Ivo seems to almost give into, but regardless, things remain peaceful. 30 years have passed, and things are considerably different nowadays. Ivo became one of the lead scientists of the Ark, working only under his grandfather. Adam Tower, though retired for a while now, has given his position to his young son, Abraham, naming him the new gun commander. Abraham wasn't the only one to join Gun, however. Seeing his potential in both wisdom, skill, and power, Shadow becomes one of Gun's top agents, way earlier than he does in the original timeline. Also joining him with her obsession with learning things about the Earth, as well as her analytical mind, which she 100% learned from her grandfather, was Maria Robotnik, becoming Abraham's main source of intel on anything that Gun needs to know to protect the Earth. Not everything is sunshine and rainbows, however, for this is the time where Professor Gerald meets his end. Being well into his 90s, Professor Gerald dies peacefully in his sleep, leaving behind a legacy of scientific breakthroughs that has done nothing but push humanity closer and closer to peace. Ivo and Abraham made the ultimate decision together to shut down the space colony Ark and move all of its research back on Earth. That way, the Ark can be preserved in Gerald's memory. Ivo, however, has a hidden motive for getting the Ark shut down. Ivo had a plan that will help him attain the world peace that his grandfather always wanted. He always found these stone things his grandfather was always researching fascinating. He had big plans for these stones, so Ivo set off to find the Chaos Emeralds. And that is where we're going to leave off for today. What do you guys think? Is this new motivation for Ivo something interesting to explore? Put your thoughts in the comments below and tell us what you think may happen next. The next part of the story will be coming out next week, but if you can't wait that long, become a channel member right now and you'll be able to watch it right now. Links to our merch store and social media are in the description below, and to you, our well-esteemed guest, I bid you adieu.